talking with Eric Leeds, legendary sax man, known probably primarily with his work with Prince and Sheila E. But this is probably a little bit different of an interview for you, I would think, Eric. A lot of people
that's good.
Want to know about,
that's fine.
How was your work with Prince and what was it like and this, that, and the other. And we're actually not going to talk much about Prince. We're going to talk.
That's great because I've talked my ear off about that over the years.
And also, I don't want to hear about Maceo either.
Well, Maceo's a friend and a mentor, so I mean, he will get into mix, but I hear you. Yeah. No,
that's fine. I know that you've credited Maceo, I think, many times in your eventual success or what you've turned out to be as a sax man. But I can probably study and listen to guitar players and study art, but I'm never going to be a great artist or guitarist if I don't have the talent to begin with. So you're definitely a super talented guy and a Grammy award-winning sax musician. Tell me about that.
Well, yeah, well, that's an interesting story in itself. Only because it is, I am an official Grammy award winner for something that I have absolutely no responsibility for whatsoever. And this is a quirk of the NARAS, the Grammy Association. The Grammy is for having been a part of the Revolution, which was what Prince called his band at the time when I first joined his band. And it's for the song, Prince's song, Kiss, which won the Grammy Award. I think this was in '86, I think. For Best R&B Song by Duo or Group. Since the single was released officially as Prince and the Revolution, everybody in the Revolution got a Grammy. I got my little statuette and was officially given Grammy Award. However, there are no horns on that song.
That's funny.
Now we added horns to it for the live performances. We'd add a lot of arrangements because there were a lot of songs in Prince's band that didn't have horns on when myself and Matt Bliston, Pittsburgh native, joined Prince's band. So we would come up with horn arrangements for the songs for the live performances. But the original recording of the song that won the Grammy did not have any horns on it.
So you actually were not born in Pittsburgh.
No.
You ended up here in Pittsburgh after traveling a little bit. Tell me how you were where in Virginia and then eventually in Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
how did that happen?
Was born in Milwaukee, and then my family moved to Virginia, Richmond. My father was a department store retailer, so as his career moved around, we moved with him. We moved to Pittsburgh in late August of 1966. My dad was CEO of Gimbel's department store in Pittsburgh, the Pittsburgh division. So that's why we moved to Pittsburgh. So we lived in Squirrel Hill. I went to Taylor Alderdice, graduated from Alderdice in 1970. And immediately after that went to Duquesne School of Music, starting in the fall of 1970. So I was in Pittsburgh until my parents left Pittsburgh in '74 and moved to South Florida. I stayed in Pittsburgh because that's where my career started. And I was in Pittsburgh until '83 and then moved to Atlanta, Georgia for a few years. And while I was living in Atlanta in '84 is when I got the opportunity to meet and start to work with Prince. And then moved to Minneapolis. For the first several years that I was working with Prince, I was ostensibly still living in Atlanta, but was spending more time up in Minneapolis. We were doing most of our recording out in LA, so I was traveling a lot.
You're primarily a tenor sax player. You play Barry. You don't. I've never seen anything on soprano. Correct?
No, don't play the little horns. Actually, while I was at Duquesne, of course, Duquesne didn't yet really have a jazz studies program. I mean, we had a jazz ensemble, but the jazz repertoire and curriculum is still classical saxophone. So for that, I played alto because that was basically the instrument you played if you were a saxophone major at that time, you played alto. But in all of the ensembles, I played baritone, symphony, wind symphony, and the jazz ensemble. I actually didn't start playing tenor until a few years after that.
When you picked up saxophone at a pretty young age, around 10, 9, 10, somewhere there. So had you played saxophone just before arriving in Pittsburgh, or?
Yeah, I had already been studying privately. I started in, I think, 5th grade in Richmond. And, 5th and 6th grade elementary school band was like a teacher, a music teacher would come twice a week. I mean, that's, it was pretty. But I started, at that point, I had no, real thoughts about pursuing music as a career, but I wanted to play the instrument and be able to get more out of it than I was going to be able to learn just from a music school teacher in an elementary school, band. So I started studying privately immediately with a guy who was a clarinetist with the Richmond Symphony and a saxophone player. So I studied with him. But after 6th grade elementary school band, I never played in school bands after that. But I just continued to study privately. I had my first little band in Richmond, just kiddie band. Mm-hmm. When I moved to Pittsburgh, I think there was about a year or so there where I really didn't do much. But I think by the time I was in, maybe around 10th grade or whatever, I decided to start studying again. So I started studying with Nestor Koval, who was also teaching at Duquesne University. So when I went to Duquesne University, he was my saxophone teacher at Duquesne, although I also studied with the other teacher who was at Duquesne at the time, Bernard Sorelli, who was a clarinetist with the symphony, Pittsburgh Symphony.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, back then especially, thinking about being a musician, if you thought about why did you not wind up in the steel mill and instead, or as a teacher in school, or something other than becoming a professional musician? That's a tough road. It's a tough road to go down.
It is. I think the only other thing that I was thinking about was maybe pursuing law or something like that. By then, I never really had a plan. It was just like, I enjoyed this music thing and I like the hours. It was like, I'm a night owl. I like the hours of that. So let's see and obviously the love of the music, that I was so involved with, just as a listener. A lot of it has to do with my older brother, Alan, who has had a remarkable career in the music business, and as a writer, as a manager, as a producer, as a tour manager. I got into the music that I got into because I was introduced to it by my brother.
Was Alan your connection with Prince? Is that how that happened? Or
yeah,
okay,
yeah. Alan was pretty much my connection into
everything.
Most of the situations that I got into.
So first of all, how did you? Let's go to H.B. Bennett. H.B. One of the great drummers to come out of Pittsburgh and in the Pittsburgh area. He absolutely was a great guy too. Remember the day I met him at the balcony. How did you meet HB? Well, how did that happen?
Well, I think I briefly met him. He went to Alderdice also. He was, I think, a year behind me. So I think I met him briefly while I was a senior at Alderdice, but we really didn't become friends until after I had left. Graduated from Alderdice. I think it was in the summer of 70. He and I ended up in a band, a quote unquote band. We never gigged.
Was that
it was
Matrix?
One of those things. This was, it didn't have a name. It was kind of just a pop funk rock band. I think we were trying to play Chicago. This is 1970, Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Chicago,
Right,
things
sure.
like that. Never played a gig. We spent the summer just rehearsing and jamming. And HB was the drummer in that band. After that, I then, went to Duquesne and was just so tied up with that. HB was in a rock band for a couple of years. We stayed very close friends, but we didn't play together until a couple of years later when he was in a group with Harry Cardillo on keyboards. And that's the group that I then joined, and we came up with the name Matrix for that band.
Were you gone when HB formed the Balcony Big Band, or were you still around?
I had left by then. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was a little bit later in 80 something.
I mean,
right
meanwhile, during these years after I'd left Duquesne, I was starting to hang out with the Cats, the guys who were the mentors for me in Pittsburgh. I hooked up with Eric Kloss, who became one of my primary teachers and mentors. And for several years there, every once or twice, a week, I would go over to Eric's house and we would sit and we would play, we would listen to music. And, Eric is one of the most, significant, mentors and teachers of, he didn't just teach me, it wasn't just saxophone lesson, it was music lessons. It was music and life, because Eric was such a remarkable person. And I also have to say, I never had the chance to let him know, and I was so saddened when I learned of his passing a few years ago, Don DePaulis. I learned so much about harmony from Don. And I recorded on my second album for Paisley Park Warner Brothers. The album was called Things Left Unsaid. There's a song of Don's on that album called Time's Gift, which is an absolutely wonderful, wonderful piece of music. Don was a tremendous composer.
So since you brought up a couple of names, who would be your musician's musician?
Well, there are the obvious. When I look at the music that probably defines me or as much my own little personal Hall of Fame, it comes from the jazz side, and it also comes from the R&B funk side, because that was obviously a very, very important part of who I am as a musician. The first musician and music that really, really got inside of me to the extent of really, providing that love of this music was Ray Charles. That classic period of Ray Charles in late 50s, early 60s, when he had the small band with Hank Crawford and David Fathead Newman. Fathead Newman on tenor was my first love of the saxophone. And to this day, of all of the great saxophone players, there is no more beautiful sound to me than the sound of Fathead Newman. That was just tremendous. He was a Texas tenor man. And that's when I was, 10, 11 years old. That's what got inside of me, and I think was probably the incentive for me that I wanted to try to play the saxophone. My brother Alan, of course, was involved with James Brown during the late 60s. So I grew up knowing James Brown since I was a kid, and grew up around those musicians, the Maceo Parkers and all the great players that played with James Brown, particularly from the 60s. I can't imagine anything about my life in music without the music of James Brown. Now, obviously, I didn't aspire to be a singer or a dancer. I played saxophone, but the music of James Brown is so significant and such a central part of everything that I think about in music. When I think about John Coltrane's sound and his playing, I think about it in the same context of the singing of James Brown. To me, it's just this, the two sides of the same coin. The music of Miles Davis, obviously. There's probably no one whose career in music probably means more to me than than Miles. One of the great circumstances of my life when I was working with Prince, I got to meet Miles and know Miles a little bit, which is another story entirely. But I also have an absolute passion for Afro-Cuban music, salsa, whatever. Grew up with that, fell in love with that music, probably in the mid to late 60s. And in the realm of Afro-Cuban music, Eddie Palmieri is kind of like, he's the combination of Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, and Thelonious Monk all in one.
Okay, let me run down some names and, short blurbs if we can on this stuff.
Sure.
And if you don't have a comment, we'll skip to the next one. But
yeah,
one name you already brought up, Dave Budway.
David is possibly, and I've had the opportunity to play with some great pianists over the years. David is one of my absolute favorite musicians I've ever had the opportunity to play with. And I'm determined to once again get in a situation where we can play together again. He brings such a, he's one of those guys that understands, or at least in my situation, when he was playing music with me in my band, it was like he basically said, okay, Eric, what's my role in this song? And my basically is, okay, here's the Bob, like, we might have a song where maybe we're just grooving on like an E minor chord, for a while. Mm-hmm. And basically it's like, and David will come to me and say, what kind of voicings do you want behind you? And I said, well, here's certain kind of things. And then he could take that and he could intuitively take it. And as an accompanist, besides just a tremendous soloist that he is, but as an accompanist behind me, he could intuitively lead me down paths that I could think while I'm playing, this is exactly where I wanted to go, but I didn't know it until he brought me there. Mm. And when you have that kind of rapport with somebody, that's worth its weight in gold. And that's what David really meant to me. Tremendous musician.
And Eric Kloss, you already mentioned. Tell me a little bit about Eric.
Well, I mean, everybody knows he was a child prodigy. I mean, started recording for Prestige Records when he was like, I think, 16. He is a very giving person as far as what he was interested in trying to project to me. And he was so supportive. It's one of those guys that at that point when I was studying with him, I'm at that point now where I'm starting to realize, okay, maybe I can actually make this work. But the frustration level starts to come into play because you get to that point where you're starting to really hear and expect to get to the next level. And you find that getting to that next level is a lot more difficult than it might be. And Eric is one of those guys that just says, hey, man, don't worry about it. You're going to get there.
What about Kenny Blake? Did you know Kenny or anything about Kenny?
No, Kenny well. We played together. I was in Billy Price's band, the Keystone Rhythm Band, for 4 years, from like 79 through 82. And for the first year that I joined the band, Kenny was in the band. When I joined the band, there were two. Billy had two saxophone players, Kenny on alto, and one of my absolute dearest friends, still in Pittsburgh, tenor man Jim Eminger, who played with Billy for years. And Jim is just a wonderful tenor, jazz blues player, and he was playing tenor. So when I came into Billy's band, I came in primarily as baritone player. After I think the first year or so, Kenny then left the band to go on do other things, and then I switched to tenor primarily. So for the rest of the time that I was with Billy's band, it was Jim and myself just playing two tenors. But yeah, I've known Ken. Kenny is first of all, Kenny is one of the most wonderful sounds on alto I've ever heard. Just terrific. Terrific lead player in a section. I mean, Kenny intuitively knows how to be a lead alto player in a section. Very important. And knows how to, knows all of the aspects of how to blend and nuance and things like that. We had to help, the three of us in Billy's band was a hell of a section. But, as the lead voice on top, Kenny has, that his sound was going to really have a lot to do with the definition of what the section sounded like. Badass cat.
Now let's hit on a couple of biggies. George Benson, obviously.
Yep.
Did you ever get to meet George or play with George?
I actually think I'm on a George Benson record. I think on a cut of something that I think was produced for George by Ricky Peterson, who was of the Peterson family, the first family of musicians in here in the Twin Cities. Ricky, of course, was David Sanborn's keyboard player, musical director for years and years.
Yep.
Done a lot of production. I think he produced some stuff for George, and I believe I'm on a song, and I couldn't tell you the name of the song, and I can't remember the album. It was probably in the early 90s.
And his story is amazing.
Yes.
As are many of the stories of Pittsburgh area musicians. It's always amazed me how much amazing talent we have and have had in the Pittsburgh area that never seems to go anywhere. And it, the ones that have, it's almost by luck, although, I would think the music industry is just full of luck. But it's always been tough to break out of Pittsburgh, and I could never really understand.
Well, let me give you a little perspective on that. Perhaps this is another name that's on your list, but because so many people know me because of my involvement with Prince, and because the vast majority of people who are into Prince's music are into pop music. They're not necessarily jazz fans. Some are. So I get a lot of people over the years that come up to me and say, Eric, you're the greatest saxophone player in the world. And I'll thank you very much. It's very nice of you to say. And I said, sometimes I'll ask them, so really, who else do you listen to on saxophone? Because basically when they say that, what they're expressing is their absolute love for the music of Prince. So basically the value of anything that I might have contributed as a member of Prince's band or recordings, that's what they're really relating to. And they really don't have a background, to have the expertise to be able to say what makes a good instrumentalist or not, So it's basically, okay, you love that music and you're complimenting me for whatever, because I happen to have played on that song, whatever. So I take it in that context. Thank you very much. But, this really isn't about me. It's about your love for Prince's music. So I get that. So get so many people that come and say, Eric, wow, what was it like to be able to stand on stage with the greatest guitar player in the world? And sometimes I might say, oh, you mean the time when I was a member of the Duquesne Jazz Ensemble and Joe Negri soloed with us? Now, Prince is one of the greatest guitar players you could ever imagine in the context in which he plays. And as a guitar player, Prince could do things like, Prince could do things that all of a sudden, you thought Wes Montgomery had walked in the room. But within the context of the music, Prince was an extraordinary guitar player, just absolutely ridiculous. But Joe Negri is as great a guitar player as I have ever been in a room with. Now, I'm not expecting Joe Negri to play a solo like Prince plays on Purple Rain. But like I say, Prince isn't going to come and be able to play Stella by Starlight at 300 beats a minute with the jazz big band. So you choose your context. But Joe Negri is a world-class virtuoso of the instrument in the way that he plays. So for people to just assume that, it's just like you played with Prince, that must have been the greatest thing in the world. It was. Prince was a remarkable musician, but I played with Joe Negri. So yeah.
Well, that leads me to, let's get back to HB. Now there's a guy who, played drums good enough to go anywhere. He could have been with a band that was, a super band or whatever. But tell me a little bit about HB and Prince. HB tells me, or told me, when he got the call to go meet Prince. Again, Prince is a very talented guy, and he can do many things, and he can play many instruments, but he doesn't necessarily play the instruments the way they're played by people who know how to play them.
Yeah.
So HB tells me a very frustrating incident where he went out and he was going to be, in Madhouse or whatever. And Prince wanted him to play something that just isn't physically possible by a drummer. And he got very mad at HB and they got frustrated. And they're both hot-headed people, they're both perfectionists. But H said, I was so mad at him because you can't do that. You can't. He told Prince, you can't play what you want me to play.
Well, here's let me give you the background on first and how HB first met Prince. And I think this was in '85. I was up here in the Twin Cities. The first project that I was involved with Prince was a band that he was producing called The Family. And we still have the group together, me and Paul Peterson, Susanna Melvoin. We call it F Deluxe now. But it was produced, all the music on the album was written by Prince. He played everything on the album except the horn stuff that I played on the album. And we actually had a top 10 R&B single song called Screams of Passion from that album. This was 1985. So we were rehearsing here ostensibly for a tour that never happened because Paul actually decided to leave the group and go do something else for a while. So that project fell apart, and that's when Prince asked me to join his band. So it kind of worked out for me. But anyway, that summer, H was still living in New York, but he on occasion would come to Minneapolis to hang with me. So he was here for a week or something, just hanging. We were in rehearsals with the group, The Family. And one evening we ended up we were actually rehearsing in a warehouse. It was before Paisley Park recording complex had been built. So we were rehearsing in a warehouse, and we had a jam session one night. And HB was when Prince was there with some members of his band at the time. So we were jamming, and I just decided to ask Prince. I said, my friend here is a drummer, known, played for years or whatever. Can he sit in with us on the jam? He said, absolutely. Now, here's the thing. At that point in time, Prince was using, his drummer in the band was Bobby Rifkin, who was the original member of drummer in the band, The Revolution. This is before Sheila came into the band. But by now, Prince was known so much in his music for the drum machines. He was one of the first artists to really kind of significantly use drum machines. I'm told that the Lynn drum machine that he has, I don't know this for a fact, but I'm told that the serial number on his first original Lynn drum machine was 0002. So anyway, Prince's rhythmic spot on everything, so much of his music is on top of the beat. I'm not saying it rushes, but it's on top of the beat, because the drum machine is very, very, we're not talking Elvin Jones behind the beat here. It's like, so HB's spot, his basic rhythmic feel is slightly behind the beat. Kind of from a funk R&B. HB's heroes were guys like Bernard Purdie, Steve Gadd, Clyde Stubblefield, those guys from the, that 60s back funk R&B groove, which is just behind the beat. Real heavy foot, hard snare, really heavy in that regard. Now, HB's time was impeccable. HB's his time was uncanny, but he was just a behind the beat player. So I was curious to see how Prince was going to relate to a vibe and a rhythmic spot that I didn't really kind of relate to Prince's thing. I was kind of expecting that Prince wasn't really going to dig it. It was HB, myself, and Prince playing just some keyboard. It was just the three of us. And it's just a fat back groove for about 15 minutes. And after that, Prince pulled me aside and said, "Where the hell did this cat come from?" And I said, "Well, that's my best friend. We played in bands off and on for years." And he said, "Man, that cat does things that and I'm kind of looking at Prince. Well, all he did was just hold the groove for 20 minutes. HB was a classic drummer from the standpoint of, I'm the drummer. I control this. It might be your groove and you're the leader or whatever. And you're saying, we got to get from point A to point B. It's like, okay, I'm the one that gets you there. So HB is going to run that groove and he's going to respond to even some of the nuances that I might be playing just as a soloist. Just a little thing like just being decided. I'll decide when I go from the hi-hat to the ride cymbal. I'm not going to wait for you to tell me, because a lot of times in jams, that's what Prince would do. Prince would tell drummers, hold on the hi-hat. And then 10 minutes later, he said, all right, go to the ride cymbal. And they said, I'm having none of that. I'm the drummer. That's what I do. And Prince was like, whoa. So all of a sudden, HB was like on Prince's good side. So over the next couple of years, when HB was hanging around, we jammed, and Prince always dug HB's playing in that context. So we did this recording, Prince and I, called Madhouse. Prince played, we did 2 Madhouse albums that released. The first one, Prince played all of the instruments on it except the horns. He wrote all the music. And it was Prince playing drums on everything. Prince was an amazing drummer when you think of him in the context of not being a drummer.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
He had a looseness and an independence to be able to do things that when you think about it, said, wow, that's really trippy, but a lot of it's bells and whistles. HB was not a bell and whistle player. He was a hardcore groove. I mean, HB could swing his ass off. HB did not particularly care to be a soloist. He didn't like soloing drum. I mean, occasionally he could take a solo, be really cool, but his thing was not about being the soloist. We were going on tour with Prince's band, the European tour, and the Madhouse album had come out, and we had a successful song from it. So we needed to put together a working band, because we were going to be, Madhouse is going to be like the opening act on the next Prince tour in Europe. So Prince came to me and just said, how about HB as the road drummer for Madhouse? And I said, well, fine with me, So Prince said, call HB, see if he can come up here. Tell him it's an quote unquote an audition. Because, I've made my mind up entirely. They get out, they said, fine. So I called H. I said, okay, here's your shot. I said, quote unquote, it's an audition. But HB said, I understand. HB comes up here. And he was here for maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. And the first week or so, we're just playing and grooving and trying to, get into the groove with some of the stuff that we were doing. Prince wasn't coming to rehearsals yet, but we were recording the rehearsals, and I'm giving them to Prince to check out. What I didn't really understand at the time is that Prince was really, really proud of his drumming on that album. You could have brought Tony Williams or Jack DeJohnette in, and they could not have been able to have replicated what Prince was doing. And what I didn't really catch or was really aware of to the degree of Prince was really just all he could think of is that he wanted to hear it played exactly. And it was an impossibility. Like I say, you could have brought in Billy Cobham. And I don't think who Prince loved. Billy Cobham was one of Prince's favorite drummers. I don't think Billy Cobham would have, Prince would say that's not right. This is HB playing drums. This ain't Prince.
That's the story that HB told me. That part of the story is
So basically,
you said, Jim, it was like I couldn't do it. It was impossible.
Yeah, it was oil and water. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And basically now, the thing is, look, this is Prince's music, and he has every right to want it realized in the manner, in which he wants it. It's just, it was an interesting facet at that point to realize that Prince, as remarkable a musician as he is, could not see past that issue. That, dude, the only way this music is going to sound the way you want it is if you play drums in the band. So Prince, you're going to have to be the drummer in Madhouse. And that wasn't what he was, going to be exactly. Yeah.
So, I don't want to keep.
But here's the thing I tell about H. We had this band together for a year and a half called Taking Names, which was
Yep. Next thing I was headed into. Yep. Go ahead.
And that's a band that Matt Bliston, trumpet player, who later played with me in Prince's band. Matt and I had gone to Duquesne, so we had known each other for years. Taking Names, we were primarily a cover band because that's what we needed to do in order to earn a living. Back in the day where we played 5-6 nights a week, that band was together for a year and a half and we played like 375 gigs. I mean, we were working all the time, and there were lots of clubs in Pittsburgh to play at that time. Evergreen Hotel, Eric's Boardwalk, all these places all over town. We were an R&B funk band doing a lot of covers, but we did write our own music, which was more instrumental stuff, more quote unquote like weather report kind of stuff. And there was a lot of soloing in the band. We had Jerry Malega, the late Jerry Malega, on keyboards, myself, HB. We had tremendous guitar player, I think is back in Pittsburgh, Marty Koffler. George Jones was on congas and percussion. The late Bobby Wayne was our vocalist. Later on, we had another singer by the name of Joy Duncan, who was a singer. Mike Hollis played bass in the band. And we would do certain arrangements of instrumental songs that, would have long solos. As a drummer and a captain of a rhythm section, HB, for me, was one of the most intuitive accompanists. You really want a rhythm section behind you that is going to get you where, to know how to build. HB could do that like no other musician I have ever played with. Because HB was a musician's drummer. He was, he was a tremendous drummer, but he was even a greater musician. And he understood the big picture. He understood, I'm going to get you where, relax, I got your back. And I could start a solo knowing that, I just want to carry this. HB is going to know exactly when to goose it up. HB intuitively is going to let me know, Eric, you're done. Get out of here. I'm done with this. We're done. On to the next. Or otherwise, okay, Eric, I got your back. And all of a sudden, pow, the rhythm section kicks in and you just go with it.
So, well, let's wrap things up here. First of all, while we're still on the subject of HB, maybe give me just a, how did you hear of his passing?
I heard about it because I was with him.
You were with him. Wow.
I was in the room with him. And I drove to Pittsburgh to be with him the last couple of weeks. And I was with him with his sister Wendy and his brother Brian, and three of us were in the room when he passed. So
you've done a lot of things. You've played with a lot of people. Any regrets to this point? If you could say, boy, I'd really like to go back and redo that, or
not in that sense. I think I guess I tended to be lazy when I was young. During that period of time where if I had really put in, say, more of the hard work, just in practicing the instrument particularly, to think of the certain aspects of playing the horn that I would like to be, say, a little bit more accomplished at. you know?
So let's go to Sheila E. Real
Sure.
quickly. And so it was probably one of the most wonderful things I'm going to put words in your mouth, but probably one of the most wonderful things to come out of meeting Prince was the chance to meet Sheila E. and go on to do some things with her, most notably E Train.
E-Train particularly. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about how you got to meet her and
well, obviously I got to meet her through Prince. She had her band, and she was her band was the opening act on the Purple Rain tour that I played on with Prince in '84 and '85. And at that point, like I say, Prince had his original drummer Bobby Rifkin in the band, but we all had a sense that Prince really wanted Sheila in his band, and that was what happened about a year and a half later, or whatever. When Sheila Sheila was the drummer in Prince's band for like 2 years that I was in the band, and obviously she was just a remarkable player. But the interesting thing is, so you mentioned we went on years later to have this band called the E Train that Sheila put together. Actually, it was an idea that once again my brother kind of came up with. Sheila was at a point in her career where she was looking to do something more beyond just the straight up pop stuff that she was doing. And Alan suggested it, said, you've got such an untapped credibility as a musician that you could really take advantage of, and perhaps you put a band together, because obviously she came up through Latin music and loves that too. So why don't you put a band together that's not just like a pop band, but that's more of a, that brings everything that you are. So we put this band together called E Train. It was together for a couple of years. Charlie Sepulveda was the trumpet player. Brian Lynch played trumpet in that band. The bass player was a fellow by the name of Mark van Bakkenhagen, who is the bass player now with Tower of Power and has been for some time. Tremendous keyboard player from Brazil named Renato Neto, who went on later to play in Prince's band years later. This band, E Train, was probably one of the hippest bands I ever played in. And it demanded so much of all of us. And everything that I thought I knew about how great a percussionist and drummer that Sheila was in her playing with Prince, I didn't have a clue. Because basically, she could play what Prince needed her to play with one hand tied behind her back. She was that good. But in E Train, it not only provided her with the opportunity, it demanded of her to bring everything she had as a percussionist and drummer and as a musician. She's an exceptional band leader, just an absolute tremendous band leader, and her ability to put a band together and realize the music in a way that really just taps into the potential of everybody in the band. And I had to bring my A game to that band.
Well, Eric, just thank you so much.
Jim, my pleasure. And
it was my pleasure to the max. And I just thank you for the CD. Having music with HB on it was just really special, and it'll add to what I want to do.
Cool.
Love Valdez in the Country, by the way, one of my favorite songs.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of fun with that.
The other reason I say that too, though, is Tommy Bellin was just a special guy, and I got to tell you, when I opened up this CD, I almost had tears because I never expected to see that name. I really didn't.
Tommy was one of those guys that when he came to a rehearsal, he knew the music. He knew my music more than I did. I mean, when he was just one of those guys that when he came to a rehearsal, he was, not that the other guys didn't. I mean, it's David Budway, it's HB, but Tommy was just one of those guys that, he said, man, I got he would just like eager. He said, man, give me the shit. I want to, and he would come in, and you never had to worry about Tommy, about anything.
Well, again, Eric, thank you so much. I really appreciate it beyond words. And
thank you.
I've got a lot of material to go through, so I have a lot of editing to do.
Well, I'm just so happy to have the opportunity, like you say, to talk about all the musicians in Pittsburgh, because this is, if I had never had the opportunity to work with somebody like Prince, I'd still be pretty much the same musician that I am. Those are the players that mean they're the most significant players to me still. No.